Hello everyone and welcome to this Heritage Volunteering Group coffee afternoon. It's March the 8th, which only means one thing. It is International Women's Day. So for today, we are going to be focused on gender and what that means to any of us and all of us. And we're going to hear from a couple of people about their own experiences about gender in the workplace. And for today, we're going to focus mainly on the workplace and professional development, but obviously you may have your own personal insights to share as well. So we're going to start off with our two speakers, and then we will move to an open discussion and some questions. So please keep your questions in your mind, pop them in the chat as they occur to you, and we will run a panel discussion once we've heard from Tamsin and Catherine. And so that I don't mistake you guys, I'm going to let you introduce yourselves and we will go from there. But a huge thank you to you both for joining us today. We're delighted to have you. Tamsin, over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Really delighted to be here. I'm here with a variety of hats on, I suppose, and I would say that's probably one of my abiding thoughts about gender in the workplace, and I'll come along to that in more detail. But yeah, I'm Tamsin Russel. I work for the Museums Association, leading on workforce, but to my absolute joy, I'm part of the amazing HVG group and lead on the EDI or inclusion working group. So I'm here primarily to talk about my experience as a woman, and I'll explain that very shortly, and also in terms of my role of HVG. I'm not here talking specific about any of my work associated with the Museums Association. And the only other thing you need to know as part of today's talk is I'm always really candid, because I find being honest and transparent enables everyone to grow, as long as we do that with respect. So I'll be sharing certainly some very personal insights in terms of my experience in the sector. Thank you.
Wonderful. I'm excited already, ladies. Thank you very much.
So thank you. And so one of the first things I'm going to highlight is so often we as women, and I use that term broadly, so that's a really important thing for me to highlight, that is when I talk about women, I mean all women. So I'm an inclusive feminist. So often we find that women choose not to or apologise for occupying their space. And I am that one person, as Catherine just said, well, I think I've probably talked too long. Absolutely not. You have this platform, you've been given this platform, and you can continue to occupy that space in terms of that platform. I sometimes, when I'm at conferences, just look to see how many people do overspeak their time slot, and women very rarely do. So they don't steal time from other speakers. They do tend to occupy their space, which is great to those limits. But certainly I think we need to think about that. So I'm delighted to be here. The first time I heard about International Women's Day, I was traveling in Australia, and it was on the 7th of March, I think 1995. And I came across a celebration of women. One tote bag later and 27 years on, I am ever thankful to all the women that have put the wheels in motion, specifically to enable me to travel across the globe, age 21, to be able to visit and be a solo traveller. So always, always grateful. I am going to be talking about my experience as a white working class woman. I'm cis, I'm heterosexual, I'm atheist, and I have no underlying health conditions or disabilities. Now, the reason I have listed all those things out is I do also think it's really important to understand that my experience is exactly that, my experience. And what we do know from a raft of research is that if I did have any other of differences, if I did have an underlying disability, if I did have a different ethnicity, my experience of work as a woman would be different, and it's most likely to be different in a negative context. So that's another really important thing I think to hold on to is when you're listening to people, certainly Catherine and myself, about what our experience is. That's our experience and not everybody else's. So What do we know? So we know that 51% of the population are women, yet we know that only 23% of them are in the workplace. Now, obviously, there are going to be people that are too old to work and people that are too young to work and people that for whatever reason can't work. But so even though we are still a majority within the demographic, in terms of our participation in the workforce, it's lower. And also when we look at that participation in the workforce, you're more likely to see women undertake part-time roles. So in terms of part-time work, 38% of women are likely to be working in a part-time basis, as opposed to men, where it's only 13%. We also know that there is sector segregation. So what does that mean? That means that we're more likely to see women working in health and social care. We're more likely to see women working in retail or in education. And interestingly enough, are all of those areas of work really well paid? Perhaps less so. So the occupational segregation in terms of field and often role exists, and that then does have an impact potentially on unequal pay. So what we also know from recent studies is, on average, if you're a woman in this audience and you're sitting virtually next to a man in this audience, if you were doing a job of equal value and equal worth, you would still be earning 15% less than they are. I know this is not a really good news story, is it? But, you know, we have to say these things and we have to measure these things to enable us to know where the barriers are and what the reality is, so we can then put in an improvement plan to change them. We also know, excuse me, that as part of that occupational segregation, women tend to be in the lowest paid jobs in their entirety. And that isn't just a function of part-time work, it is a function of this occupational segregation or sector segregation. We also know that 58% of women have said they haven't been able to apply for a job or apply for a promotion that would get them maybe more money because of additional caring responsibilities. And I want to make sure that everyone's really clear. I find it difficult when we talk about women in the workplace. There's often a conflation about reproductive behavior, you know, so everything that's coming along, the reason why you can't do this or reason is all because you've chosen to have a family. And I think that that's a very different, that's here, but that's not about the majority of people's experience of work. What do we know about our sector? So unfortunately, more research is needed. So there is limited research into the different diversity characteristics in terms of the workforce. So Arts Council England have done in the past some really good work, certainly their creative case for diversity measured for their major organisations, what the makeup was. And the most recent one, and this is still a couple of years ago, said that 62% of the workforce in the heritage sector were women, okay? So hold that, 62%. We do know that organisations report on equal pay. However, because equal pay reporting only requires organisations of a certain size to report on equal pay, we don't have a really clear picture about what that looks like. So, for example, Catherine, in the smaller organisations, you know, we might not get that. And what we've certainly seen, even in my own organisation, is that COVID has gotten in the way. And again, if you Google COVID and the concept of equal pay, is lots of organisations haven't been able to do the analysis because they have been focused on other things. We know from the Museums Association's research into bullying, Sticks and Stones research, is that you are more likely to feel that your gender was a function of why you were targeted. And that increased if you were a young woman, not hugely, but it still increased if you were a young woman, also increased if you were a young woman with a disability. I'd love to comment on young women, working class women with a disability, also through a sort of an ethnicity lens, but our response rate in terms of our diversity profile was really, really small. So I can't make any of those thoughts. Basically, more research is needed. All of that leads me to think that existing structures, procedures and policies, all of those hangovers of a predominantly male-dominated workforce still exist. and are still normalized and institutionalized, so that when somebody makes a suggestion around changing working hours or core hours, they are often met with, well, we've always done it like this, or how would that work? But what about these people? So lots of sort of nostalgic senses, or also whatabouteries, rather than actually saying, actually, let's just try it. Let's just move it forward. So that's, I suppose, my starting point. What does my experience of work mean as a woman? So I've got a few bullet points written down. So one of the things I have, I suppose, been exposed to, in fact, that's 62%. So I've heard women and men say that the sector is overly feminized. So there's too many women in this sector. And actually what we need to do is we need to get more men in the sector. Now, absolutely, 62 versus, do the maths, 38, I think, might well be a call to look at rebalancing. But if we look at occupational segregation, if we look at the roles that women tend to occupy, they don't tend to be either in leadership roles or higher up in the hierarchy. They tend to be segregated in roles that have a very clear and defined remit. So I'm not sure what we mean by feminisation of the heritage sector. I think my experience also has been that beware a feminist in wolf's clothing. So what do I mean by that? And I'm planning to do a Twitter line about it later on today, is that lots of women say they're feminists, but judge them on their actions rather than their words, is what I would say. So don't be fooled. Things that I often see happen is that women occupy either extra role behaviours or co-worker behaviours that pigeonhole them. So what does that mean? It means that often women are the first people to put their hands up when somebody says, can somebody be on a committee? Or if your organisation is saying, we're going to look for champions, can you be a green champion, a communications champion, an equality champion? Again, often what we find is that women put their hands up. I'm not saying any of this is bad, but there is a consequence to that. So if you're putting your hand up to do all of these extra role activities, what you have to remind yourself of is your finite amount of time. And what does that mean in terms of spreading yourself so thinly that those really important, those conversations that are meant to be having either as a function of your role or as a function of the discipline you work in, are you adequately rested and have adequate thinking time and participation time to also do that? Or are you spread too thinly because of all of these extra role behaviours because you put your hand up? They can be hugely rewarding. They can be hugely developmental. I'm not saying don't do them, but go in when you're putting your hand up for extra role activities with your eyes wide open about what that might mean, what might be the negative consequences as well as the positive consequences. I think there's also some other sort of co-worker behaviour, which potentially now we're not as much working together in an office, might well perpetuate. So I'm often, and have been in the past, no longer, the person that says, I will take notes. I'm the person that says, shall I get everybody a cup of tea? Because I'm wanting to make sure that everyone feels comfortable and everyone is in a place where they can be most productive. What that means is I'm outside boiling the kettle when other conversations are happening in that main space. What that means is that I'm paying attention, writing notes, without necessarily being able to formulate my ideas, without necessarily being able to say, well, what about this? So again, extra role activities, co-worker behaviours, you know, the person that's always organising the leaving party or the collection. Look around your organisations, people. I see who are doing these extra role activities. So that's just mindful for that. I think there often is a sense of modesty. It's probably a nice way of putting it. I've put self-deprecation and self-reduction on my list about saying, oh, only, or have I spoken too long, or I think you've probably heard enough about me. So sometimes, depending on who we are, we might then choose to diminish our voice as a function of saying only or just, or maybe another thing, have you thought about, so tentative language potentially rather than assertive and owning language. I've got different hats, and I've already talked about extra role and co-worker, but I also think it is important to think about the extra roles that people have outside of work. And that could be caring for an older relative or a partner or children. It's all of those things. But there is certainly still a sense of presenteeism that's required. And often people say, oh, I'm only part-time. No such thing. Do you know what? As a part-time worker, you could probably do more work in the time you have than you've got a full-time worker, because they'll be doing other things. So this whole idea about diminishing ourselves when we've got either extra roles as a function of caring responsibilities, I think is important. Certainly when I went on maternity leave, my other co-workers in my office were not hugely nice about me going on maternity leave. My choice, I get it. Not everyone wants to or doesn't need to, but it doesn't mean, primarily at this day and age, the people that are going to be going on maternity leave are going to be women, pretty much. So what does that mean in terms of how people treat you? And also, what does that then mean about your need to go back? So for both of my maternity leaves, I was back in the office for a return to work day after 6 weeks. Complete and utter nonsense. Because what I felt I had to do very clearly is that the fact that I was now a mother hadn't changed anything about me. I was still there. I was still on time. I was still committed. And please judge me on who I am as a professional rather than who I am outside of this. Now, I think we all have to bring a whole person to work. And it just, I think my reflection around that was that actually no one's going to remember that. I'm now 4 organizations along. No one remembers all of that really significant effort, 4 organizations behind, because everyone's moved on. So there's something also about thinking about the long game around all of this. I'm going to draw that to a close and just summarize. So 1, think about challenging outdated modes and ways of thinking and unevidenced statements like, I think the sector's overly feminized. Beware of feminists in wolf's clothing. Think about where you invest your time and effort in terms of extra role and co-worker behaviours. Please don't undermine yourself. There are plenty of other people waiting in the wings wanting to do exactly that. And absolutely think about what your other life and career choices are and how they relate. I had a conversation with somebody this morning when we were talking about bringing our whole selves to work, and they reflected, but work isn't my whole self. So just think about those other domains and what those pushes and pulls are. I'm going to stop talking and hand back to Rhiannon.